All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. First few minutes are logistics anyway, so we can get folks caught up if folks are coming in a little bit late. As I said, today we've got a great presentation from Ebony Mason here in the middle of the country in Illinois, a neighbor of mine from, I'm in Missouri. But she's going to be talking about using published materials in an open entry, open exit classroom. And just to tell you a little bit about this project, so this webinar is part of a larger webinar series called Teacher Training Plus. It's a project that's sponsored by Dollar General, and the idea behind it is a lot of us get a lot of training up front before we start working with students, but then as we kind of get into the classroom or working one-on-one with students, we start to run into problems or issues, and a lot of times the program that we're working for doesn't really have the resources to provide that kind of ongoing support. So we're looking to do that with this project, and kind of the particular strand that Ebony is presenting on kind of stems from the idea that published materials are often constructed with an ideal situation in mind, and very few of us are actually teaching in that ideal situation. So we have to make a lot of adaptations in how we use those published materials, one of them being an open entry, open exit classroom, which most materials are not designed for. So Ebony's going to give you some good ideas about how to deal with that today. So all of our webinars we record. We will be sending you out a follow-up email in about a week. It's a loose time frame, but that email will include a link to the webinar recording. Ebony's going to share her slideshow with us, her PowerPoint slideshow. We'll have a little summary sheet of the key points that Ebony goes over, and that's kind of a nice thing for you to be able to share with your colleagues in your literacy programs. We'll also include a transcript of the chat and the Q&A. For folks who are attending the webinar, you'll get a certificate. And then these last two bullets are features specific to this project and this particular strand of the webinar. So you'll see there will include links to small group coaching sessions. So again, kind of the idea behind this project is providing support to teachers once they get started with instruction. So Ebony's going to be giving you some really great strategies. We're going to give you about a month to go back to your classroom and try those strategies out. And if you're implementing them and you still have questions, you'll be able to sign up with for a small group coaching session with Ebony. And so when we send out that follow-up email, we'll have sign-up links for that. They're about no more than 10 people. As I said, they happen about a month after the webinar. And the idea is you can sign up. There might be other teachers there with you. And you just go in there and you ask Ebony your question. I'm working with my group of students, and here's the materials I'm using. And I tried this strategy, and here's where I'm running into some problems. Do you have any suggestions? And Ebony will be able to help you out. So it's just kind of a structure we're trying out to see how that works in providing additional professional development for you. And then that last piece, linked to a material scholarship. So this particular strand is designed to present you with some generic teaching strategies for dealing with published materials. So the strategies that Ebony talks about today, they're not material specific. She's going to talk about some general features and structures to look for with whatever materials you're using. And we know that most of the time when you start in a program, they already have materials there available to you. So sometimes you may not even have a choice of what materials you're using. But if you're not tied to a set of materials, we have an opportunity for you to request a set of materials, and we're going to focus on basic literacy instruction. So that's adult native English speakers reading below about a 6th or 8th grade level. And if you're not tied to a specific set of materials, you can apply for a grant to receive classroom sets of some New Readers Press published materials that you can kind of try out with your students and apply some of the strategies that Ebony is talks about today. So here you have the link to go to the website for the published materials strand, and you'll see down at the bottom of that page, there's a little place that says apply for New Readers Press Materials Scholarship. If you, that's what it looks like. You can click there where it says click here to access ProLiteracy's grant portal. You will either log in if you've applied for like a mobile learning fund or a National Book Fund scholarship from us in the past, or if you haven't done that, you can create an account. You click apply, enter TTP for Teacher Training Plus in the access code box. That's going to take you directly to the application, which you'll fill out and submit. It is needs-based, and what you'll be able to apply for is one of our 3 sets of materials that are designed for basic literacy instruction. It's a $1,000 scholarship, which means you'll be able to select about $900 worth of materials, and then the additional funding will cover shipping and handling. And so that might be the Laubach Way to Reading series, where you would be able to get maybe 6 or 7 student sets that have a student book, a workbook, the leveled reader, more stories, and then a focus on phonics, which is a supplemental set of materials that has additional phonics work. Laubach Way to Reading is a phonics-based set of materials. And then you can also order the Laubach Way to Reading Teacher's Manual and the Teacher's Edition for Focus on Phonics. If you were interested in Challenger, you can get classroom sets of either level 1 through 4 or 5 through 8. And you can get student sets, which have the student books and teacher's guides, or you can get writing sets, which are the writing materials that supplement those, and you can get mixtures of each of those. And then the third book, the third kind of published series that we have is Journey to Success. And just so you know a little bit about these, like I said, Laubach Way to Reading is kind of a structured, sequential, controlled vocabulary series, works really well with very, very beginning level students. It is kind of features phonics instruction and then kind of building on that with other decoding skills. Challenger is reading levels about 1st through the 4th grade or 5th through 8th grade. So the number levels on the books kind of roughly coincide to reading instruction levels. It focuses somewhat on phonics, but a much more kind of comprehensive decoding strategies in the lower level books, and then a lot of work on reading comprehension strategies in the higher level books. The stories kind of differ. The odd levels are fiction. The even levels are nonfiction. And then Journey to Success is more of a kind of a star, based on kind of the star concepts of vocabulary development and some reading comprehension strategies before you read. There's a variety of stories. And then after the stories, you work on kind of applying the applying the vocabulary, fleshing out the reading comprehension skills and strategies, things like understanding main idea in detail, things like that, and then some writing activities. And you can either get a set of levels 1 through 6, you can get the entire set, which includes an introductory level, or level 8, and the teacher's guides for those are free PDFs that you can download online. So if you're interested in applying for that, there'll be a link in the follow-up email that you can find out more about it, or you can just go to that Teacher Training Plus website And I think we'll get Danielle or somebody to put that in kind of periodically in the chat if you want to go check that out. Okay, last thing before we turn things over to Ebony. We're going to ask that you use the chat to introduce yourselves, which you've already done. Share links or resources with the group. Ask questions to other folks that are attending the webinar. And like I said, we will share that transcript when we send out the follow-up email. So all of those links and resources that people are sharing with each other, they're going to be included in that. We're going to ask if you have questions for Ebony to please use the Q&A feature to ask those questions. And that just allows us to track those questions, make sure we get everybody's question answered. The webinar ends at the top of the hour, but Ebony has agreed to stay on and make sure everybody's question gets answered. So as we get about 5 minutes away from the time we need to stop the webinar, we're going to remind people to put your questions into the Q&A. We'll stop them at the top of the hour, and then Ebony will make sure that everybody's questions get answered. Okay, so I think that's enough of the kind of logistics and things like that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Ebony, who is the person you've really come here to listen to. So Ebony, if you want to share your screen.
Yes, thank you, Todd. Good afternoon to everyone. Let me, All right, good afternoon. Welcome. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking time out your day. I'll start out by introducing myself. My name is Ebony Mason. I have been in adult ed for a little bit over a decade. I've been in education for actually 16 years now. And what a joy it has been. I've had the honor of working with many underserved populations, as most of you all do, day in and day out. I initially started out working as a literacy specialist in a charter school system in Illinois. At that point, I knew that I wanted to stay within literacy. I wanted to stay in education overall. After working in that role, I went on to work within the Cook County Department of Corrections, developing curricula around electrical programming and carpentry programming for people post-incarceration. Did some curriculum writing around apprenticeships and post-incarceration programming, ideally. Currently in my role, I develop high quality language arts, science, and social studies curricula for community college system here in Illinois. I am a product of community college, so I know firsthand the needs of our students. I've had the honor of receiving my bachelor's degree in Chicago and my master's in Chicago as well. In 2018, I received a humanitarian award, the Sister Thea Bowman Award, around serving underserved populations. So nice to meet each of you all. I'm looking at the chat as we talk. All right, our agenda for today. We are going to define what's an open entry and open exit classroom. We're going to identify how published materials are designed to be used. We're going to talk about 4 different methods around working with published materials, and then we're going to tie it all back together, and I'll allot some time on the back end for questions. All right, so starting out, what is an open entry, open exit classroom? So this is a place where most of us operate in adult education. Open entry and open exit classrooms are very common in adult education programming. So open entry and exit classrooms are a method of class delivery that allows a student to enroll in a class throughout the duration or near duration of the class. Students are allowed to complete the class at any time throughout the duration of the class, and they are not prescribed a timeline or a number of hours to complete the class. So there's no particular time, as in traditional classroom semesters or traditional time frames. We don't have that in open entry and open exit classroom. Enrollment is usually rolling. There's usually rolling enrollment. And this is where most of us fit in our daily instruction in an open entry and open exit classroom. So we're going to talk about some methods that are designed to help teachers successfully utilize materials in any open entry and open exit classroom setting. No matter what the setting, these techniques will be beneficial. All right, so let's first identify how materials are designed to be used, okay? Published materials can be used sequentially, or you can scaffold the materials. So let's talk about the difference in the two. The sequential usage of programs are a series of assignments that build on each other over time. They usually add skills and knowledge from previous lessons. So this is where you go back on something that you've gone over before. They repeat or review skills and knowledge from previous lessons. Most of our students have, we'll talk about this in one of our methods. Most of our students are familiar with sequential materials, the usage of it. Most of us use it. However, I personally would say that it brings the largest amount of challenges as an educator. Materials that are scaffolded, they break assignments or learning elements into manageable tasks. They also allow different lessons to be combined as a whole of a skill or knowledge, and they don't have to be completed in order. So at this point, one great book that I personally like for using the scaffolding technique would be the score books. A lot of the score books by New Readers Press are really good because you don't necessarily have to start with a particular lesson. You're able to navigate that how you like. All right, so our first method is structured grouping. Structured grouping can be beneficial to your high-end students and your low-end students. So an example of structured grouping is when you group students according to instructional level. So for example, you will put your ABE students with your ABE students, ASE students with ASE students. And you can actually use somewhat of an informal assessment a lot of us, TABE is our driver. For a lot of us, TABE or CASAS is our driver. Here, you can actually create your own assessment in order to assess students' needs. So that can be around vocabulary, decoding skills, whatever you feel would be best to address your students' needs. Create an informal assessment upon entries for students so that you can gauge as the instructor, and they can actually gauge that for themselves. Peer-led groups work perfect with structured grouping. So that's where you can take a high-end student, an ASE student, place them with an ABE student possibly, a student that has, and not necessarily according to level, students that have mastered a particular skill, you can place them with a student that actually may be having trouble navigating a particular skill. They haven't mastered the skill yet. You need some reinforcement behind it. I think that peer-led groups work really well. One thing about peer-led groups is that you kind of have to foster a sense of security within the classroom where your students feel safe as far as what they know and what they don't know. And of course, with our adult ed students that it takes a little more to make them comfortable in a learning environment. Remember, we have to meet our students where they are. These are our non-traditional students. So it's very important that even with peer-led groups, we foster a very safe environment. I always tell my students there's no such thing as a safe space because what's safe to you is not safe to me, but we're going to create an environment where we all agree on one common ground. You also can create cohorts. Now, with an open entry and open exit classroom, one thing about cohorts, they allow students who come in together to be grouped together. So for example, you can group according to an entry date. So it won't be a particular date, perhaps use a particular period. It might be a week or two. Most of these students came in the beginning of October, so we're going to put those students together. And one advantage to this is actually if you are a program that utilizes TABE, you'll know that they'll actually they'll actually use TABE. They'll TABE test around the same time. That's one of the added benefits of it. So the cohort, they progress through the materials together. They're able to navigate the materials together. They're able to rely on each other. You understand as an instructor where this particular group is. One important thing that has worked for me is setting learning goals for cohorts. So this group comes in together. They understand, hey, we are going to work on building, for an example, a 3-paragraph essay. That's the focus of this particular group. So you know that this group is working on, that's their learning goal. It may be a group that you decide they all need work just around writing. So you know that that's the focus of this particular group. So using this entry date, we know that this is what we're going to focus on. And then you can actually stagger the cohort. So initial cohort, for example, if you're working with the cohort around English language learning, you know that this group needs to work on pronunciation, which is, I think you can't get enough around pronunciation with English language learners. So creating a cohort is extremely beneficial, especially to an open exit, open entry classroom. So creating independent work opportunities. One thing about an open entry, open exit classroom is that the teacher is the driver in so many different areas. So what does creating independent work opportunities look like? Where it's an opportunity for an instructor to give students independent work. It's an area where you understand that no matter what the student's level is, I can give them independent work. Now, we have to be very transparent in this moment because most of our students, that's an area where they struggle. It's having independent work, navigating independent work, just the ability to focus on a particular assignment. And I think it's important sometimes it's important to build up to this point, not necessarily coming in the door like this, but kind of easing into it with your students. So your students understand that independent work is something that they will eventually have to master. It's going to happen in the classroom. Perhaps every time you meet with them, you allot a particular time for students to work independently. And one way that I utilize this in my classroom is through journal writing. Initially, students are so distraught as soon as you say we are going to freestyle write for 10 minutes. It seems like 10 minutes is an eternity for students. Oh my goodness, you'll get so much pushback initially. But once you've established a pattern, the students understand that. So the first 10 minutes of class every day is allotted for freestyle writing. You don't have a particular subject. Sometimes there may be a particular subject. Sometimes there won't be. So you have 10 minutes. This is what you're going to do. You're going to focus. Some students find it better. As my students say, it's a little old school to write on pen and paper. So that's a little unbelievable at this point. However, they need to focus for 10 minutes. It could be notes in your phone. You can work on your laptop, your iPad, your tablet, but you are dedicating 10 minutes. And this creates a sense of independence for students so that they know for future references, when you do decide to create these independent work opportunities, they're able to just simply focus. Even if it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, students are able to focus. We do know that our higher level students can be given more independent work, right? We know that our high level students are able to sit for longer periods, they're able to focus for longer periods. They're able to actually sometimes finish what they have and help other students. They're able to actually self-navigate as well, which is important. So if a student knows, okay, I have been working on this, Ms. Mason, I'm thinking that I probably need to go back to paragraph building. Okay, then you go back to paragraph building. That's one of the benefits of independent work opportunities. The teachers provide support when needed with independent work opportunities. So I always say, as a teacher, you can never sit in the front. It's one of those things, the teacher is constantly navigating the classroom so that everyone understands that the teacher will be navigating. So as the need comes up for you to stop at one particular area, you're able to do that. And sometimes that looks like giving the entire classroom independent work and you navigating that space to kind of see what students may need support. Students are not always transparent about the need for support, so you're able to do that. Also, if you're giving a particular assignment for everyone to work on independently, you may know your students that will need strong support around completing the assignment. And then it allows a teacher to also support a particular group of students, right? And I like to call the groups workstations, right? So workstations, depending on your classroom setup, you're able to group students in stations, right? So usually tables or everybody comes together to kind of set up these workstations. And workstations can look like this particular group is working on fractions, this particular group is working on essay writing, this particular group is working on pronunciation. Whatever area you feel your students need help navigating, you're creating workstations around that. Everyone can work independently in the workstation. I actually allow my students to work together at whatever opportunity we have. Whenever it comes up, I always tell them you can support each other through this assignment. I think that's important while we create independent work assignments, to understand that they can work collectively as well. All right, so we have redundant review sessions. So there's no such thing as reviewing too much in a classroom, in an adult ed classroom. That looks like having the ability to go over whatever you've been through. So one tactic that I use, which is a review, is I call it the KWL. Anybody that's taught in elementary school understands what KWL looks like. We talk as a group about what we know, our knowledge of a particular subject. When you're introducing the subject, you're asking your students, what do you know about this subject already? And remember, you're fostering an environment where people feel comfortable to say whatever they, can link to that particular subject. So students are able to put up, and you can utilize a board for this. You can utilize a Jamboard, if anybody's familiar with Jamboard, which is actually a Google Doc online, if you where you can actually go online and you can input. Everybody has the ability to go on and type in something on the Jamboard. So students are putting what they know. So that may look like your blackboard or whiteboard or smartboard divvied up into 3 sections. So on the left first column, students are putting what they know, right? And then in the middle, you're putting what you want to know. That's something that you can go over. And in the last column, after you've gone through the subject, you read on the subject, you covered that subject in class, students put what they learned. Now, I usually don't delete that information or take it off the whiteboard or the smartboard, and I allow students in our next class session to go back over that, right? Excuse me. So you're allowing students to review whatever they've gone over already. And one thing about using a KWL in sessions, you can randomly insert that into your class sessions, and that's considered a review. Another tactic for redundant review sessions is that you have a fixed review time. So that looks like your students know on this particular day that, hey, my instructor is going to go over what we've gone over for the past perhaps 3 or 4 class sessions week. So for example, most of my classes would occur Monday through Thursday. So that means that every Tuesday is a review day. We're going back over what we've gone through the previous week for the review session. Remember, if you have handouts, to include handouts on one particular location. If you're able to put references online, that you have that online. So students know that every Tuesday I am going to have a review session. And this allows for students to, one, have some consistency, which is key in education, giving our students a consistent schedule. That is key. One thing I can say is that I don't actually have review sessions at the very beginning of class. Usually I allow it somewhat in the middle, because remember, you want to look at your attendance and enrollment patterns, and I'll speak more to that in a little while. But for example, my 9 to 12 class, I know that 9 o'clock, I am probably going to be the only one in class. So I usually push my review session to about 10:30. So students kind of know, okay, that Usually they're in class at this point. Not only they're in class, they're present, right? Because I always tell them you all are present, but you're not present. So they're present, they're in class, they're alert, they've had time to wake up, settle in, get things settled. So hey, on Tuesdays at 10:30, I know that we'll have a review session. So for example, if your class is a Monday, Wednesday class only happening twice a week, you say your review days are every other Monday. I don't know, but attendance patterns are important in this part. So if you know that Mondays your students usually don't come to class, I know Monday, Wednesday classes students are usually not present on Mondays. Then you say, okay, I am actually going to review every other Monday, so they know, hey, even if posting a calendar in the classroom or online or sending out a text alert to say, hey, don't forget this is our review session tomorrow, so students know, okay, I probably need to make this a priority to get to class. Paying attention to enrollment patterns is just as important as your attendance pattern. So your attendance pattern is, hey, the days that the student come to class. If it's a Monday through Thursday session, then I know that the attendance pattern, I look at what days is my attendance most full. Is that on a Thursday? Is it on a Wednesday? So that you're able to pay attention to that. As far as enrollment patterns, we know that wintertime is coming, and a lot of times students do not come to class so much. The seasons are changing, and the needs of our students are different. So children tend to be sick, so kids can't go to school, and the student can't come to class. So we look at that. For some reason, I don't know if anybody else has this, around holiday time, enrollment kind of dwindles down a little bit as well. When the weather is extremely warm, so you have to find the right niche. A lot of times in adult ed to figure out what works for you and your students. How can you best fit the needs of your students? For example, evening classes. I know we host evening classes from 6 to 9. I know that after 8 o'clock, my students have kind of tuned out because most of them have been at work all day. They probably won't remember anything I'm saying after 8 o'clock. I know that if it's 6 o'clock, my students are usually just getting off of work at 5:30. They're commuting. So you have to find the sweet spot for your class. So that might look like, hey, our review session started at 7 o'clock. Or if you have a weekend class, understanding that, okay, you may only see your students once a week, then you know that you have to prioritize review sessions every week, because if you're seeing them once a week, then you know that you need to really try to meet that student where they are, because you're only seeing them for one time per week. And that's really, really important to just kind of figure out what's your sweet spot with your attendance and your enrollment patterns. Also considering the fact that if it's an open exit, open entry classroom, that their enrollment, they may come in for 2 weeks and they may not get anything else. So that's saying, okay, within the first 2 weeks of class, I am establishing a pattern so that the student understands, or I'm at least trying to capture that student with some information of what they know, assessing what they know, assessing where they need to go, looking at their TABE scores and saying, okay, my student is here. I know I need to get my student here for a level gain. So assessing every angle that you can and trying to capture that on the front part, especially for enrollment, because we know that sometimes after the second or third week of class, or, for a student, they tend to not come as often as they once were coming. All right, so let's bring this all together, because this can actually function in an entire classroom all as one. So for example, if we have a Monday through Thursday class, we're choosing Tuesday as our review session day, right? So this class knows that every Tuesday we are having a review session. If I miss Wednesday, if I miss Thursday, I should make sure that I'm there on Tuesday to capture what happened for that week before, right? So students are able to have a little bit of flexibility in their lives and their schedules, things like that. When we look at cohorts, right? So there's a cohort, for example, your first cohort has been in class 4 to 5 weeks. They're pretty strong. They understand, okay, I understand how, I always say we build, I'm gonna use this for an example, we build essays. So if we're building an essay, a student understands that, hey, sentences make up paragraphs, paragraphs make up essays. That's your 4 to 5 week, right? So they have a full understanding of what the expectation is for writing an essay, for an example. Your cohort, your second cohort, they've only been in class 2 to 3 weeks. So they're still working on just building a paragraph. They're trying to understand what a paragraph looks like. So we're still working on paragraph around the second or third week. Our third cohort just rolled into class. We're just trying to get them to understand what's the subject, what's the predicate. So everybody is staggered. Everybody is on a different playing field with understanding what the expectation is. Yet everybody is completing the same task. So everybody's working on essay writing, but we're just at different points in it, which I think is so important. So we understand that the first cohort can support the third cohort. So when you get ready to come along with your workstations, okay, we know that cohort 1, they've been in here for a while. They're really strong in that. Let's roll that into cohort 3, right? Let's let them support cohort 3. So to the right, we have, what does class look like? So your second cohort, at this point, they may be in workstations, right? So they're working individually. You have some people who are supporting each other in small groups. They're working in pairs, right? And I don't want anybody to think that pairs necessarily look like people at the same level, because a lot of times instructors will group students at the same level. Group them at different levels. We can always learn from each other, right? Your third cohort who just rolled in, they're also working on independent work. So maybe you're giving them that assessment that we talked about, an informal assessment, so that you can assess where they're at. Maybe it's just a writing piece, so you can kind of see where they're at. And then you're checking your work in pairs, right? So that's where you create a safe space where a student's able to say, okay, well, what about, giving feedback to each other? And remember that the instructor is always available for questions should you need that. That's for your third cohort. And then we're looking at what would we be doing at this point with our first cohort. This is your strongest cohort. So this means that you may be building a lesson with them, right? You're leading a lesson. You're going over something that you've already done. You're reviewing. So at this point, you're able to navigate them, because remember, perhaps one day with this cohort, they can kind of grasp the lesson. They're going to be able to navigate that a little bit better than a cohort that's your third cohort that just rolled in. So you're able to kind of find what works best for your classroom, but you can operate with all of these strategies at one time. So remember, we're going back to workstations. We're creating workstations where our students are able to work on a particular subject at this workstation or a particular task. Remember, we're creating working groups, right? So that's where our students can support each other. The instructors navigating the classroom, or the instructors leading a lesson. And the time you have to spend leading a lesson may depend on what group you're at or what your students know. And these are areas that you can kind of tweak for your classroom to kind of help your students understand what may work best. And remember that at any given moment, you can put all 3 cohorts into a lesson, right? So remember, there's no such thing as too much review. So for your first group, they may understand this particular subject area. They've mastered it. Here's a review. You all let them know, what will happen. One thing that I can say that's beneficial with any of these methods is actually to give your students an agenda for the day, for each class, even if that means just writing it on the board, so that students, no matter where they are in the classroom as far as level or mastery of a skill, they know what you're doing for the day. When they see an agenda, they're able to say, oh, okay, then I know we're going to do this at a particular time. Sometimes I give the agenda prior to class happening, so that may look like, hey, when you guys come back on Wednesday, today's Monday, I'll see you again on Wednesday. Here's our agenda for Monday. And I know a lot of times adult ed courses do not create a syllabus, but I like to say I create like a rough draft syllabus for my students, so they're able to see what we'll be working on, which also can kind of help the teacher gauge where the students are with a particular subject area. Because when they see, hey, Wednesday we're working on this, and some students say, oh, I understand, I know about that. So you can kind of feel a little confident going into the lesson that students have mastered a particular area, or you'll understand when they'll need a lot of support, because they will give feedback around that. With all the oh no, not that, you'll definitely be able to read the room with a particular subject area. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Ebony. This was some great information. We do have a question from Diana, but Diana,
Okay.
I am going to use my prerogative and like ask a question that I'm interested first. I apologize. So, Ebony, kind of going back, can you go back one slide?
Mhm. Yes.
And so I just want to check my understanding of this. So it sounded like as you were talking about kind of grouping people into cohorts, kind of starting them together, moving them along in the materials, and then a new group of people come in and you kind of group those people together, and that becomes like your second cohort. One of the things that you're really relying on, and this is my question, one of the things that you're really relying on is kind of having a consistent structure to your class so that those folks that have been in class for 4 or 5 weeks, they really understand what's expected of them when they're doing independent work or how to use workstations and things like that. So they kind of understand when you give them that syllabus for the day and say, okay, you're going to be doing workstations first, and then you're going to be doing the independent work in your books here, that they've kind of been conditioned and say, okay, this is how the class works, and this is what I know uh, um, to do during this time, so that you can then spend a little bit more time bringing those new people in. Am I understanding that
Yes.
correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
And now I want to go back to Diana's question, which is she says, so I'm the only instructor in class, virtually and in person. She's like, how can I be available to answer questions when I'm leading instruction with another cohort? And
Okay.
I think kind of, just kind of a expanding that a little bit. I think Diana's question is very specific, but just in general, how are you balancing that time so that you can provide, directed instruction to somebody, but knowing that even if people are doing independent work, if they have questions and need you to respond to those, how do you deal with that? How do you balance that?
So Diana, I know I had the honor of teaching virtually and in person. We call it a blended group. One thing about it, my online group, I was able to give them a particular assignment because I felt like the in-person students kind of were, I had to address their needs a little bit more. So one thing I would do, for example, my class was from 9 to 1. So my 9 to 11, my students online understood that they were still logging on, they're still getting settled in, but they would have a subject to, it may be a writing piece, a small writing piece. And then my in-person class, I was able to say, okay, well, let's go through some questions you all may have, and we kind of navigate that way. And I would have to rotate it. It's actually a balancing act, I would always call it. But just, or vice versa, Diana. So perhaps saying for your online class, we're going to allot this particular time and we're going to go through some questions. One thing about it, also, you have the ability to tell everybody we're just going to have a review the first 45 minutes of class. Everybody asks questions online and in person. So it's kind of finding the right speed for the class, but there will definitely be a need to give some independent work to your online and your in-person students that you can kind of navigate both areas as one person. And I hope that helps a little bit.
And Ebony, if I can add to that, so a couple of other things that you mentioned. One was the grouping piece where you talked about kind of having the higher level or the more experienced students lead the other students. So I think that might be one of the ways
Mm-hmm.
too that you can kind of take advantage of if students have questions when they're doing independent work, is maybe one of uh, the first avenues for answering that question is turning to another student or maybe a higher level student. And then, also sometimes, we might have to wait a few minutes
Mm-hmm.
to get a question answered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but great question. So here's another one from Catherine. Can you describe the SCORE curriculum? I teach basic ESL. Does it work with such students?
I was speaking of the Score Boost. They have a lot of critical.
Right, right. I think that's what she's referring to as the Score Boost. Yes.
Okay. I don't know. They have score boost around CASAs as well. So perhaps that one will work well, the score boost for CASAs. But the score boost for GED, I know that it has a lot of critical thinking. I don't know if it would fit best for our English language learners, especially I think English language learners that are, I don't know if your program does the transition from when they tap out at CASAs at a particular level of CASAs, they go over to TAFE. Even my students there, I have a little bit of area of a struggle. So I think Score Boost for CASAs would fit best for that particular group of students.
Yeah, and just to provide a little bit of background for Catherine, so the Score Boosts are, and I think that, Lauren has put in some links to those materials. So those are small, kind of paper-covered books. I think they might be 40 or 50 pages or so. They have kind of short, self-contained lessons. They're generally geared towards higher level students that are kind of either preparing for the GED or the high set, or they have score boosts around TABE and CASAs to kind of work on some of those skills that are being tested. But so I think what Ebony was saying about maybe your higher level ESL students, they might be good for those students that are transitioning into like a class that's maybe blended with native English speakers. Not so much with maybe lower level ESL students, but kind of going back to what Ebony was saying earlier, the nice feature about those books is they are designed, they're not sequential. They're designed where each lesson is kind of a self-contained lesson, and you really can kind of go in them and pick and choose the lessons that are most relevant to the students you're working with and their needs. So in that way, they really are kind of ideal for an open entry, open exit classroom where a student comes in with multiple needs, and whatever lesson you're working on, if that fits with their needs, they can jump right in, not having done previous lessons.
Yes.
We have a question from Kara, just asking, do you use a specific curriculum or a book from a series in a class, or are you using kind of a variety of materials in your class?
I use a variety, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's like a recipe. We just put a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I am more focused on language arts, so I have a lot of language arts classes, and I use a lot of writing curriculum, and I usually tailor the curriculum that we have a district curriculum, but I usually tailor it to use whatever books we have readily available. So writing for the GED test, like I mentioned before, the score boost books, the writing for the GED test. Also with my higher level students, I use the GED practice website. So I use a lot of prompts from there, use a lot of language arts practice questions from there in class. So it's just a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of a good strategy or a common way that folks deal with an open entry, open exit classroom is by using, even if you have kind of a core series that you're using, as the basic structure for the class, is being open to bring in different materials, especially to set up those workstations like you were talking about and things like that, where another set of materials might provide some extra practice and might also kind of be more geared towards independent work or things like that. And I would just kind of encourage folks to also think about since COVID and kind of as we're using more and more online resources, that integrating some of those online resources into even if it's into your in-person classrooms, that those can provide kind of a good structure for people to do some of that independent practice work while you're doing the teaching, the kind of live teaching out of a set of published materials with another cohort. We have a question from Bob. What were the websites that you referenced?
I utilize materials from GED.com, highset.com is really good. If you're looking for language arts curriculum, some of the social studies or science curriculum, there are a lot of online resources. I know that, I don't know if anybody's familiar with WTTW Chicago. They have real good history lessons. We've used a lot of that around social studies. Just, I think for social studies, just trying to put it into context for your students so they understand time frames versus particular details. I always tell my students, I want you to understand time frames better. So just being able to, usually I can just look online and look up a particular period. If you're trying to discuss, for example, the Cold War, just Googling the Cold War and looking at some curriculum around that. So I pull from a lot of online resources, especially because a lot of students have access now since COVID to online, they can go online more. Also being able to let your students know that they'll have to somehow be able to navigate a computer has also been beneficial since COVID. That way that they can utilize their own online resources as well. So I guess that's the plus with COVID. Since COVID, we're all navigating a computer space a little bit different. I know for a lot of my students, they're able to utilize the computer more than they did before, and mostly because it was mandatory. So just whatever online resources you can find, but GED.com has some great resources, and also highset.com has some great resources as well.
So I think Lauren captured the GED and the HiSET websites, but what was the one in Chicago?
WTTW Chicago. They have great history lessons.
Okay.
PBS also has some great resources. If you just look up pbs.com history lessons, they have great resources as well.
Okay, let's see if we can get those links in as well. I think Lauren's found the WTTW link. So I'm going to encourage folks, we're about 5 minutes from closing. So I'm going to encourage you to get your questions in. As I said, Ebony has agreed to stick around if we need that extra time to get everybody's questions answered. Everybody is welcome to stay and listen to her responses. But we will cut off questions at the top of the hour. Ebony, can you go to the next slide just real quick so we can talk about, yes, thank you. So as I said at the start, this is part of a larger series called Teacher Training Plus. We have 4 tracks. We have one around using published materials in instruction. We have one around basic literacy instruction, one around English language instruction, and one around high school equivalency, so the GED and HiSET test instruction. So you'll see that Ebony's next 2 webinars are using published materials in a virtual instructional setting. So we heard from teachers that one of the things they're really struggling with is our program bought all these books, so we have student books, they're physical books, but now we're doing virtual instruction. So how do I do that? How do I have physical books and use them in a Zoom classroom? And then the last one, using published materials in a multi-level group or class. So this again is kind of what Ebony was saying is that kind of the less than ideal situation that a lot of us instruct in. We're no strangers to multi-level classes. So she's going to be talking about virtual instructional setting in January and using materials in a multi-level group in April. And you can find the registration pages for both of those if you go to that Teacher Training Plus page. And we will also, because you attended today's webinar, you will be on our mailing list, so you'll get notices when those webinars are coming up to be able to sign up. Upcoming webinars in our other strands, you'll see effective strategies for teaching reading comprehension to adult learners. That's actually in our basic literacy strand. So coming up on, I think that is Thursday, October 20th, from 1 to 2 Eastern. What did I just read? Improving reading comprehension by connecting to the text and each other. That is for our high school equivalency strand. So working on reading comprehension, teaching reading comprehension as it relates to the GED or high set tests. And then pick your battles, best practices for helping students with pronunciation. That is for our English language learning strand. And that will also be in January. So we've got, and yes, Diana, all of those times are Eastern. Yes, great question. So we have another question. It says, are there any online assessments for teaching ABE reading? So you actually talked about the importance of using assessments as one of the ways to group students and kind of form your cohorts. Can you talk about what assessments you use, and are any of them online?
I usually formulate my own assessments. So they're usually informal to some extent. Of course, you know, you can combine that with the TABE. If the TABE is being used as a driver for placement, I usually actually pull the TABE report too. So the TABE report is a big part of it. If your program has the ability to pull the detailed TABE report, you can look at that. And along with that, I usually do an informal assessment, which is really, really good. And then there's also a website, which is called Madison College Libraries. They have really good assessments as well on there.
All right, let's see if we can find that.
I'm sorry, Lauren. It's like having to pull up.
We'll put Lauren on trying to find that. And what was that again, Madison?
It's Madison College Library.
Madison College Library. And if I can kind of add to that question, let's see, who is that from? That was from Stephanie. So regarding online assessments, so Stephanie, if your organization doesn't use the TABE or something like that, and you're looking for kind of an inexpensive assessment to do, New Readers Press materials generally have free online assessments that you can download. They're in PDF format, and they're designed to use with the material. So, you know, you'll do the assessment and it'll tell you you should start in Challenger Book 3 or Journey to Success Book 7 or something like that. But the good thing is that those numbers generally correspond to like a reading grade level. So it's not as extensive a diagnostic as say a TABE test or the CASAS, but it does give you kind of a general assessment of folks' reading comprehension and kind of vocabulary skills, and give you an approximate kind of starting off point in terms of reading grade level. And the good thing about those, so they're not technically online, go to a website and kind of complete an assessment online, but they are in PDF format. So it makes them easy to share on like a Zoom or something like that. So they are something that you could do with students or a group of students through a Zoom just by sharing the vocabulary list or the reading comprehension passage and kind of doing it that way. And Stephanie, I'll make sure that we include links to those in the resource sheet that we send out at the end as well. All right. And then it looks like I think that is all of our questions. I believe we've taken care of everybody, Ebony.
Okay.
So we are at the top of the hour. So let me just kind of wrap up by saying thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Ebony, for presenting us with some great strategies and some really good resources that folks can use. And hopefully we will see you guys back in January for Ebony's next webinar, and see you at some of our other webinar series as well. And again, we'll send out a email in about a week with a link to the recording of the webinar as well as some other resources. So thank you very much. You guys are free to go and have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much, Ebony.
Thank you.